Today we're going to take a look at interest groups and particularly what are the goals and functions of interest groups. How do they work? So our goal for today is to explain the purpose and function of an interest group, to explain how interest groups carry out these goals, to compare and contrast political parties with interest groups, and to describe the various types of interest groups out there. So first, I want you to answer a question. What are the goals of an interest group? You should know this from the reading from last night. And then more specifically, how are they different from a political party? Second thing I'd like to know, are you a member of any type of political group? Anything that gets involved in politics, and what do they do for you? What do you have to do for them? Explain if you are. So that brings us back to public policy. Just a refresher, we've already been over this. Public policy is the response or lack of a response of a government decision maker to an issue. It's all the things that the government does and all the things that the government doesn't do. So once again, when we're talking about interest groups, we're going to talk about public policy, just like we did when we talked about political parties. Now, we know that voting is not the only way to be involved in politics. We've already talked about other forms of political participation, things like protesting or demonstrating or litigation. And today we're going to talk about an interest group. It is yet another way that you can get involved in politics without voting. And especially if you're under the age of 18, this is important. You can play a role in politics, and you don't have to be a registered voter. You don't even have to be an American citizen to influence the government. So if we look at our chart, citizens join interest groups, and so they influence the government. Or the other way that we've looked at, citizens vote for government officials, which influences the government. But at the end of the day, our goal is to, of course, influence the government. All right, so now on to interest groups. According to your textbook, an interest group, and sometimes they're called special interest groups. So if you hear the term special interest on a TV news station, understand that just means an interest group. The goal of an interest group is to impact public policy. The goal of an interest group is to impact public policy, but they're there to do it in a different way than a political party. Interest groups have shared policy goals, and they try to enter the policy process at several different points. What this means is they are trying to influence who gets elected, but they're not actually putting candidates up for election. So just like a political party is trying to impact public policy, so too is an interest group, but there are a lot of differences in the way they function. So I want you to tell me, we've already gone over it, what is the goal of a political party? That's right, the goal of a political party is to get people elected. What's the goal of an interest group? Well, just to influence politics, to try to win those elections, but not for a candidate they're running. They don't really care which candidate, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, they don't care who wins. All they care about is that the candidate who wins represents their interest, their view on a particular topic. So if we want to compare and contrast, the focus of a political party is to actually get their candidate elected. An interest group just wants to influence those elections, but they're not actually trying to get their members elected. They're trying to get people who support their ideas elected. If we look at the scope of an interest group, political parties try to deal with a whole wide range of issues. So if you look at the Democratic Party, they're dealing with gun control, they're dealing with pro-choice, they're dealing with all kinds of different issues. Interest groups generally tend to focus on one single sole issue. So political parties always try to influence a lot of different issues. Interest groups focus on a single interest, on a single issue. And then finally, when it comes to the nomination process, kind of going along with our primary focus, political parties are there to nominate candidates. They pick the person to put on the ballot. Interest groups, they don't pick the person to put on the ballot, but they do try to influence those nominations. They try to convince political parties to choose candidates that they like. So for example, if you are a teacher union, you're an interest group, you don't really care whether the person who wins the election is a Democrat or Republican. You just want the candidates to support teachers and teachers' rights and the interest of teachers. So again, if we want to summarize over and over again, this is a pretty important part. Political parties try to get candidates elected. They focus on a lot of different issues. Interest groups only focus on usually one specific issue, and their goal is to just support that issue, not to try to actually get their own members elected, just to support anybody who supports their ideas. when it comes to interest groups, we can break interest groups down into a couple different types of interest groups. There are what are known as public interest groups, and there are what are known as private interest groups. So depending on who you represent and how many people you represent, you could be a public or a private interest group. A public interest group, as you may have surmised, is there to support ideas that are going to benefit a wide variety of people within the public, that are going to help the welfare of the community as a whole. So basically, their actions, whatever they're trying to get passed, they are going to influence a large number of people. For example, the Sierra Club, which is an environmental protection club, their goal is to help clean up the environment, which is going to impact everybody. Or the National Abortion Rights League, they're a pro-choice group, or Focus on the Family, they're a pro-life group. Their goal is to influence all of society. They want Congress, they want the president to approve laws that are going to impact a wide variety of people, a large percentage of the country. On the other hand, a private interest group really only cares about their own personal members. The focus of a private interest group is just going to be whatever their members want. So that doesn't mean that it's not going to benefit all of the community. It doesn't mean it's not going to impact all of the country. But when we talk about a private interest group, what they're fighting for is not this bigger overall picture of change that's going to help the entire country, but something that's going to directly benefit their own members. And so most of the private interest groups, although not all of them, but most of the private interest groups tend to be sponsored by or formed by either a business or a corporation or some type of part of the private sector. So if we look at Microsoft actually has not only formed a company, but they've also formed an interest group, and they're not out to benefit all of society. They're just out to benefit their own members. The Chemical Manufacturers Association, my guess is they don't really care if they pollute the environment or not as long as they're making money. And so they're going to try to get Congress and the president to pass laws that are going to support their points of view, make life easier for them. So the tactics used by an interest group. Interest groups can use a wide variety of things. They not only try to influence elections, influence voters, but a lot of times they'll take part in demonstrations. So if we want to think about Greenpeace or some of the other environmental groups, those are probably some of the most famous, but a lot of interest groups will have public rallies and public demonstrations. Of course, they will use litigation. They will use Supreme Court cases and the court system to try to get their way. And then one of the most important parts of an interest group is what is known as a PAC, a Political Action Committee. You're definitely going to need to know this, that a Political Action Committee is the financing arm of an interest group. It's the part of an interest group that makes donations to candidates, that tries to get them elected. So again, they're not actually running their own candidates, but they're trying to get people elected. Whenever we're talking about donations or spending from an interest group, usually it goes through a political action committee. So when you hear about political action committee, just think part of an interest group trying to get people elected that will support their points of view. So a political action committee for the NRA, the National Rifle Association, they're going to give money to Democrats, to Republicans. It doesn't really matter as long as they are pro-gun. And then probably one of the most important things that interest groups do, they are lobbyists. They go to the members of Congress and they supply them with information. If you want to think about a member of Congress, members of Congress have to do with literally thousands of different things on a daily basis. And let's be honest, the member of Congress can't be an expert on everything. And a member of Congress can't go out and do all the research that he or she needs to do on every single issue. And so members of Congress rely on other people to bring them information. And lobbyists are a huge source of information for our Congress, for our legislative branch. And so when Congress needs information, a lot of times they turn to lobbyists. Now, of course, lobbyists are going to provide some biased information, but if you have lobbyists on both sides, you get all the information you generally need. Congressmen will probably double check or look into some of the statistics a little bit more, but it's important to note that lobbyists provide a large amount of that information. All right, so there are two types of lobbyists out there. There are grassroots lobbyists, and grassroots lobbyists are people like you and me, people who are not professional, just people within the community who are interested in politics, interested in a particular issue. They work very much at the local level or the community level. So if you write a letter to Congress, or you send an email to Congress, or if you write a newspaper editorial article, if you write in when you, as a private citizen, try to influence politics, that's part of lobbying. If you're doing it on behalf of an interest group, you, in essence, are lobbying. If you call your member of Congress and say, hey, I want you to vote yes on Bill XYZ, you are playing the role of a lobbyist. Of course, if you are doing this sort of part-time, you're not going to have access to as much information as, say, somebody who is a professional lobbyist. And professional lobbyists are always paid, and they're usually paid quite generously. In fact, if you're a really good lobbyist, you could make $400,000 or $500,000 a year, maybe even in the millions of dollars range, if you're really effective and you're really good at what you do. Professional lobbyists are hired by interest groups. They are paid by interest groups in order to get those people to convince members of Congress to change their mind, or to collect and supply the information to members of Congress. And one of the key things that you need to be a lobbyist is you need access to a member of Congress. If you call up your member of Congress today and say you need to set up a meeting, they may or not be able to do it. On the other hand, if a lobbyist who's got a whole lot of money and a whole lot of political action committee money backing and a whole lot of influence calls up, chances are pretty good the member of Congress is going to make time for that. And one type of person who makes a particularly effective lobbyist is a former member of Congress. In fact, from 1998 to 2005, 43% of all people who left Congress went on to become a lobbyist. Now, why? They know the system. They know the members of Congress. They know the rules of the game. They have all the inside connections. They can do the things that a lot of other people can't do. Of course, I guess you could, but they've got the access. They know the members of Congress, and members of Congress generally tend to be more willing to meet with their friends. And of course, many of these people leave Congress, they become lobbyists, and they make a whole lot more money being a lobbyist than they'll ever make as a member of Congress. So if we want to talk about how it works, your book lays this out step by step. First you have a proposal, then you debate, then you get the government to act on it, and then finally there will be a public decision. Some of the ways in which lobbyists actually get things done, obviously they give campaign contributions. They give donations to candidates to try to get them elected. Is it bribery? Well, technically no. But on the other hand, if you give me a whole lot of money for my campaign, I'm probably going to hear out your point of view. Another thing that a lobbyist will do is they will publicly rate candidates. So for example, this was from the MEA, the Michigan Education Association. They are an interest group that represents teachers, and so they went through and they rated a bunch of different candidates who were running for various positions, and they tell you all the ones who are very pro-education, the people that they would recommend that you vote for. And this is a way to try to get people elected, and also to try to get those members of Congress or other various political positions to kind of see their point of view. And then, of course, there's the research that we talked about, sending articles and reports and a lot of information to politicians, doing the research for members of Congress. This is a huge, huge, huge part of what lobbyists do. And again, usually that information is not going to be non-biased. It's going to focus on whatever position they are trying to represent. When Congress actually holds hearings, they often need expert witnesses to testify before their committees, and not all of the expert witnesses are lobbyists, but a good chunk of them are. A lot of times a college professor or a researcher could also testify before a committee, but lobbyists very frequently go to testify before committees, and they bring with them the information they have. So if we want to look at the Washington underground, you can pause this and take a look at sort of all the different people who influence Congress. And many of them, like trade associations, is just a fancy way of saying a lobbyist, or public relations firms are lobbyists. So when we look at the different levels of influence in Congress, these are some of the things that do. All right, let's take a look at a couple different lobby groups and see if you can identify whether they're public or private. So we're going to tell you the group is the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. The purpose is to fight for the civil rights of African Americans. Is this a public interest group or a private interest group? Next, we're going to take a look at the Academy of Tobacco Studies. Their purpose is to protect the interest of tobacco companies. They are going to lobby in favor of the tobacco companies. Would they be a public interest group or a private interest group? So,
with your parents' permission, I'd encourage you to watch a video clip from the movie Thank You for Smoking. Smoking, of course, is bad for you, but the movie does provide a good idea into what an interest group looks like when a lobbyist is actually at work. So check out this clip, and if not, remind me in class and we might watch it then.
So as you saw in the video, Nick Naylor was providing statistics and information, obviously biased to tobacco companies' point of view, but still he was providing information, and of course the other lobbyists were providing information as well. So if you want to see an actual committee hearing, if you go on the close-up trip to Washington, D.C., we will go to a committee hearing room and you can actually check it out firsthand and you can watch a committee hearing. With that said, that's all I've got for you today. Next lesson, we're going to talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages, or criticisms, if you will, of interest groups. And we'll also talk about some of the different type of interest groups. So we'll give examples of them. Have a wonderful evening.